Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today's Monday, September the 13th, and I'm glad that we have this opportunity to be together. This past weekend, I had just a wonderful time with family. My niece was getting married in Chicago, and so we were all out for her wedding, and it was quite an event, from a Thursday family gathering to a Friday rehearsal dinner to a Saturday wedding. It was just jam filled. Had a lot of fun seeing family, friends. Probably danced more than I was supposed to, but it was awesome. Just so great to be with people. Came in last night, and before heading home, stopped off at the North End and had a really nice dinner with just Cindy and myself, just to get acclimated again, and now we're back. I'd like to do something a little bit different this week. First, I'd like to just give everyone a heads up that we're going to begin a series called Origin. It's a series going through the book of Matthew. What you'll find is there's a phrase that appears in Matthew 3 different times. One is in chapter 4, verse 17, and the other one is in chapter 16, where it just says, "From this time forward." And it's a break, it's a literary break within the book that begins to show you that there's a different emphasis that Matthew is taking in his book. And so the first 4 chapters, as you'll discover, are all about the origin of Jesus. Not just how he came into this world, but also linking that with the Old Testament. If you ever wondered how some of these Old Testament prophecies work themselves through into the New Testament, then the book of Matthew is really going to be a great book for you. It's going to be an opportunity for you to begin to see how these Old Testament scriptures really play an important role in their fulfillment in the New Testament. And so what I'm hoping is that in our time together, we would be able to then just dive a little bit deeper and just take a really good look at what a number of these passages are beginning to teach us. So we're going to begin that this coming Monday. But for this week now, what I'd like to do is just take a moment. And I was particularly, made aware in that I had a lot of conversations with family members and friends of families, a lot of these young kids that were sitting around asking me about, how the church is going, how work is going. Had an opportunity to share a little bit about faith with some of them, asking them what they were doing and how they were engaging. All of which to say that I'd like for some of my nieces and nephews and just family acquaintances to become a little bit more familiar with some of the more most important answers to questions that we might have. And we've gone through this before, but I thought it would be a great little exercise, because whether you find yourself on the learning end of that, or in the opportunity to say, boy, I just wish I knew how to answer some of these questions a little bit better. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just take our 5 questions that really deserve a good answer. The questions are: who is God? Who is Jesus? Why the cross? Why the Bible? Why am I here? And I thought if we just took a passage each day and just answered those questions, I'm going to take those and then place them on our YouTube page so that people could go to and refer to them. And I thought I'd try a little bit of a different setting. Thought we would just sit in my kitchen and just have a conversation across the table. So this way I make it a little informal, and at the same time, I get a chance to share some of the deep truths of these scriptures in a very, very fun way. So having said that, what I'd like to do is have you turn to the book of Acts and chapter 17. In the book of Acts, chapter 17, there is a wonderful, wonderful text here that I think if we just take a moment and began to just examine what some of these pages were teaching us, we would find that there's really good answers. And I thought, when people say, who is God? We all have, people will have all kinds of impressions. They'll look at the creation around them and say, well, I see God all around me, which is partly true, but God is not the tree. God is not the sky. God is not, the mountains or the ocean. God made all those things. He's creator. So he stands above his creation. He's not defined by his creation. And in fact, this very creation of which we see is marred, isn't it? There's a brokenness to it. This world is filled with, right, sickness and disease, right, with death. There's many, many different ways in which we can see that everything is just not right with the world. In fact, one of the interesting personal things was we went to this wedding, and while everyone's there and we're all just gathered around and being so excited to be with one another, we had a table that was set up for our loved ones that have passed this past year. And there was Cindy's mom and dad, there were people who had died this past year, and then some who we have lost, in the preceding years. So there was Cindy's mom, her dad, her brother, other family members, and then there was my son, Jared. And so all of us as a family, we just gathered around that table, and we had a picture that was there. And we just stood for a moment and just remembered, how much we really love them. But we also reminded ourselves that we have a hope that we're going to see them again. That because of Jesus, there is this hope of a resurrection. That he is showing us the way to this new life. Because Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to the Father but by him. And so we all just sat around, had a word of prayer together, and then just said, okay, now we go on with living. And we just have treasure in heaven. And it's not to make light of it. People's hearts were really sad. My son's widow, Rowan, she was with us. You guys certainly pray for her. But she was there with us, and I thought that was really just a great step for her to take. Because the more we do these things, the wound, it just begins to heal a little bit deeper. So let me bring you to this text then in Acts chapter 17. And if you come to this place where it speaks about Athens, and it's in verse 16 that you'll see this text. In verse 16, let's listen to what this says. It says, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. If the Apostle Paul were to come and visit some of our major cities, what do you think he would think were some of the major idols that we have? Would it not, it may not be idols as we think of them as carved images of creatures or, symbols. But what are the symbols in our current day? What are the counterfeit gods that we're looking to? Could it not be prosperity? Could it not be the buildings of education, healthcare? I mean, so many areas in which we seem to really excel, and we put our trust in those things. And I wonder what Paul would think of when he came and sat with us and looked at our cities. What would be some of the things that he would draw from those? But he goes on here and he says, so he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace, day by day with those who happened to be there. So Paul is not afraid to go out and share his faith, right? He's doing it not only in a place where you would expect him to, in the synagogue, but also in the marketplace of ideas where people were, engaged in commerce. And in this case, you'll see that they're also engaged in with a philosophical debate about how people are approaching life. So he comes across a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers and began to dispute with them. The Epicureans, they basically believe that you're going to have to find your happiness here somewhere. There is no life after this. So the Epicurean was trying to, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. So everything had to deal with this life's existence. The Stoics, they felt that if you were you were able to think a little bit more deeply about your spiritual life, that you can find perhaps a oneness with something to do with the deity around us. I'm going to put together a piece of paper that gives some active definitions that I think might be helpful as you look through a passage like this, because I'm hoping that people would go back and take a look at some of this text here in Acts chapter 17. But for now, you see that there's this group, right, of philosophers, the Epicureans and Stoics, neither one which agreed with the other. But in this marketplace of ideas, they are vying for people's attention. And they said, some of them asked, what is this babbler trying to say? And others remarked, he seems to be advocating foreign gods. And they said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. One of the things that I learned in this text was that when they look at Paul, you begin to realize what they're saying about Paul is that he is a babbler. He seems to be ranting on about some foreign god, and in that situation, what does he say? They seem to be preaching about this Jesus, or he goes on to say about this resurrection, and this whole context then is one in which it's not a friendly environment for the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul here is being called a babbler. Some people think that in this text, when it says, if you notice here, it says that they're accusing Paul. They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. The word for resurrection is anastasis. And in this particular case, the word is in a feminine form. So some commentators believe that those Epicurean and Stoic philosophers that were hearing Paul speak about Jesus and the resurrection, they were thinking about Jesus and his female counterpart, anastasis, resurrection. So in a culture where there were many gods that were being worshipped, you could see how they might draw the wrong conclusion because they're not really paying attention to what Paul is saying. So notice here at verse 19, there's also in the background here, you got to remember that if they weren't friendly to Paul, then what was their motivation? Some think that they were bringing Paul up because they were trying to see whether or not he was going to pose any threat to the community, right? Like having them follow after some foreign gods, kind of being seditious. So it says that they took him to a meeting place of the Areopagus, where they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting? You're bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we want to know what they mean. All the Athenians and foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. What is that? Think about that picture and the culture in which we're living in today, with social media just blasting every single day, all kinds of views, all kinds of opinions, and people could get lost in that, right? There's this constant hunger to just, hear what's the latest thing and find out what's going on. And if you're not careful, you never really take time to sit back and pause and think whether or not the things you're listening to are true and the implication that they be having for your life. We're so connected that we're becoming more and more disconnected from one another. So it's no different. The days, the dates may change, but the people, the hearts of men still remains the same. So listen to what Paul does. Paul stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. Now what you worship is something unknown, I am going to proclaim to you. So who is God, and how is Paul now going to explain God to this crowd who, by virtue of the particular philosophical schools they belong to, would not have been that predisposed to hearing about this God who in its core is claiming to be Lord over all. This God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. How would Paul answer in that environment? So for us today, this question of who is God, this is exactly the question that Paul is answering. And I think if we just paid close attention, we might have some things to share with those who may ask us that same question. So who is God? Notice what he says right away. He says, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. So God is first cause. God is above all. He made everything. He made the world and he made everything that's in it. So the creation is not God, and God is not the creation. God stands above his creation. It's just like the Ten Commandments. You ever think about that? God gave us the Ten Commandments, but God doesn't live by those Ten Commandments. How could you say, how could God keep the commandment, thou shalt not steal, when he owns everything? Or thou shalt not commit murder, when God is the one who holds life and breath in his hands. It makes no sense. Honor your mother and father when he is eternal. It doesn't make any sense, because they were given for us, those who were made in the image of God. And so right away, you get this sense that God stands apart from all of his creation. He is beyond us. And to underscore that point, it goes on and says, he doesn't live in temples built by hands. He's not served by human hands as if he needed anything, right? Because God isn't dependent upon us, right? God has given us a revelation of himself so that we might understand him better and the world in which we live. But notice another thing that it says about it. It says, he gives all men life and breath and everything else. So think about that for a moment. I'm reminded of a passage in Deuteronomy 8:18 that says that we ought to remember our Lord our God, who gave us strength that we might go out and make wealth. It's a great text to speak about people in the workplace, in the sense that God has given us all of these skills and intelligence, and they come in such varied forms. Aren't you amazed sometimes at how people could have such a scientific mind to make such, significant discoveries for us, or people who could build things, people who are musicians. It takes all kinds of people, and yet together in this fabric of a society, we can begin to build some really strong foundations. Have you ever stopped for a moment and just thought that God is the one who gives all men life and breath and everything else? You should place us in a position of being grateful and thankful, and recognizing that God is ultimately the one who is sovereign over all choices. Did you have any choice in the parents that you have? Do you have any choice in your particular gender or ethnicity? How tall you were, the DNA that you have? Fundamental to who we are as individuals, we had no choice in any of those things. They were sovereignly determined. God is above us, right? Notice how he goes on in verse 26. From one man, he made every nation of men that they should inhabit the whole earth. So again, all of humanity has as its core the creation of Adam, Eve. There is from one man all the nations of the world. We have this as a common core. It's also part of the reason why the nature that we have received is fallen, because our predecessor Adam brought judgment upon all the world, as if as we read the text in Genesis chapter 3, where sin enters the world, and man decided that they were going to go their way rather than the way that God had been prescribing. And the whole of the Bible then is God's way of wooing us back into a relationship with himself. So he goes on, and notice this. He says, not only has he made from every nation of men, from one man he made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth. But notice here it says he also determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. So when Jesus would come along and remind us that God knows every hair that's on our head, that we should not worry about what we eat, drink, or live, because our Heavenly Father knows that we have need of all these things. But the greater purpose is to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto us. So my friends, think about this text a little bit more deeply. He determines the times set for them. That has been one of the greatest sources of comfort for me as a father in the losing of my son this past year, because I realized that his whole life has been circumscribed by God. So when people say to me, well, don't you feel cheated? Like, how can I feel cheated when God is the one who says that he sets our times and the boundaries of our habitation, right? The exact places where we live. And so then I began to realize, all right, then God, he knew exactly how much sand was in my son's hourglass. And he decided it was time to bring him home. And now I'm thinking, it's the same for me. Why am I going to concern myself with some of these weighty matters when I have no control over them whatsoever? Yeah, I can try and stay healthy. I can eat well. I can, exercise my mind. I can try and, pursue this godly life that God is calling me. Yeah, I could do all those things. But it is God, it says here, who has determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. And what does he say? With all these things, it's showing that God is sovereign. God is the one who is in control. And we also recognize that this world is broken, right? It's under judgment. God is seeking to redeem this world. But for now, think about all the things that you just learned about who God is. But listen, it goes on, and God did this, verse 27, God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he's not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. So God is not only above us, but you realize what this text is saying? God is also in us. We live and move and have our very being in him. If God did not will that to be, none of us would be living. These are sovereign choices in his hands. But if we recognize that God has everything that has life and breath, all the things that are created in this world, we know him. He's making himself known to you and to me. And now it's saying this very God, it says in him we find ourselves living, moving, having our very being, because we were created to be in communion with him. And then Paul even quotes one of their own poets. It says, we are his offspring. Because it's true, right? What does it say in Genesis 1 and 2? You and I were made in the image of God. We're supposed to be the light that's shining in this dark place. We're to be like stars in the sky. Notice what he says in verse 29 then. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design and skill. It's interesting to see how we can fashion God in our own image. And then we seek to worship that image. And it's not just, like I said, totem poles or, statues or replicas. Now, what we're talking about here is anything that displaces God from his sovereign role in our life. And for many people, we can make our images of God and then we pursue them. And it could be varied in 1,001 ways. But the end result, it still keeps us from knowing who he is truly and from understanding our role here. It says, therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. And he has given proof of this to all men by raising him from the dead. So now, this one God is representing, is also in a position where he says one day he's going to judge the very world of which we are a part. Again, not only one who brought everything into existence, but also the one who's going to bring everything into account. And that goes for you and for me. So this God, the God of life, is also the one who is going to be the God of justice and the God who determines our eternity. And what has he done? But he says he has set a day when he will judge the world by the man that he has appointed. And it's all about Jesus. At this juncture now, Jesus comes as the Messiah of God. We will see that Jesus then, upon his resurrection and ascension, Jesus says, now I leave my spirit with the world so that you might know him. So in this unfolding revelation of who God is, we recognize him as not only the God, the creator God, the sustainer of all life, but the God who is above us, the God who is in us, and a God who is also, as we're going to see, is going to manifest himself not only as Father, but as Son and as Spirit. 3 in 1, the Trinity. And there's many places that we can do. All you need to do is read through Ephesians chapter 1. Just read the first 14 verses, and you'll see how the role of the Father, the role of the Son, and the role of the Spirit all participate in this judgment that's going to come on the world. But the judgment could be judgment for something that's good. It could be a day where we hear those words, well done, my good and faithful servant. Notice here in verse 32, it says, when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered. Others said, we'll hear you again on this subject. And at that, Paul left the council. But a few men became followers of Paul and believed. Among them were Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus. So someone among that astute body of philosophers heard what Paul was saying and was stirred in his spirit where he made a profession of faith. It also mentions a woman there named Damaris and a number of others. And is it always the same way, even in the days in which we're living? Not everyone's going to believe. Jesus himself said that, right? Many there be that listen, but few that are going to follow. But those who follow, they produce a fruit, 30, 60, 100-fold. People ask you who God is. Take them back to Acts 17. There's enough there to begin to expand our mind, to appreciate not only the glories of God in all of creation, but to recognize this revelation that God is beginning to give us, not only of himself, but of his Son, and of what is coming. Who's God? He's above us. He's in us. He's Trinity. There's more to say about these passages, But this is a good place to start. Tomorrow, I'd like to take you to a passage and just answer the question, who is Jesus? So why don't you share our little time together this morning? People have those questions, and you never know. There might be a Dionysius in that group. There might be a Damaris in that group. And you, by virtue of simply sharing what you're learning, you could affect the eternity of family and friends. That's why I'm doing it this morning. I hope that it ministers to you. I am thankful to be a part of this community. I missed it this past week, to be honest. And I'm looking forward to learning more and more together. So, Lord willing, see you tomorrow. Go out today, seize the day, and remember that God is good all the time. God bless you.